It's Rooster here in Tennessee. This is going to be a little informational topic of discussion video, kind of a serious matter. May end up saving somebody's life. If you're unaware of this, very, very serious topic. Just saw another individual, unfortunately, hobbyist. Looks like they were electrocuted and suffered some pretty horrific injuries to their hand, it looks like. And sadly, this is not the first time I have seen this or heard about this in the hobby, and it probably won't be the last. And before I even looked at all the pictures, I already knew what the culprit was going to be. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit here for those of you guys that aren't in the know. Um, Tube amps are very, very dangerous once they reach a certain point. Even the ones that are 1,000, couple thousand volts can hurt you bad. They can kill you. But what I'm talking about is very, very large amps. Once you get so deep into the hobby, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, and up to around 12,000 volts on some of these tubes. And a lot of these guys building these amps do not have the customer's best intentions in mind. I've been fortunate. The people I've dealt with, obviously someone that I always say is the smartest person I know in the radio business, Joe the Grinder, dear friend of mine, has built amps for me for many, many years. And one thing he always told me, or has continued to tell me, is how dangerous these connectors can be. Now, if you don't know what this is a Millen high voltage connector, and they're a relatively cheap option to run your high voltage from your power supply to your RF deck. Once you get to a certain size, in most amps, they're going to be a two-piece deal with a high voltage power supply connecting into a RF deck, which is just the amplifier section. No different than your transistor amps that have the amp section of the power supply, except here, instead of running 15 volts, 400 amps, you might be running 10,000 volts at 6 amps. So low current, but extremely high voltage. Now, the problem with what we're running into, people getting hurt by these connectors. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, and I may be being a little conservative on this. I believe these are rated at 6,000 or 6,500 volts. Okay? My rule of thumb, Joe the Grinder's rule of thumb, if it's over 5,000 volts, you wire the high voltage straight into the RF deck. Go in through the back of it. Make sure the cable isn't where it can be cut. Make sure the hole that the wire goes through isn't some jagged hole that's going to cut the high voltage wire, because that's going to get you hurt too. Do not let someone build you an amplifier running an excessive amount of voltage through these connectors. If it's over 5,000 volts, give or take, you got a little bit of wiggle room on that. I would not run these to the max voltage. Just because they're rated at 6,000 or 6,500 doesn't mean you need to run them at their very max rating. In addition to that, they can also fail. Generally, this part, I don't know if I mentioned this, how they work. This goes on the back of your whatever's receiving the high voltage. So in this case, it would be your RF deck or your amplifier section. This side right here is going to have a high voltage wire go in right there. And then it's got this center conductor, screws in. There's your high voltage. Okay, you don't thread this thing up properly. The wire comes loose. Anything can happen with these things, guys. They can be extremely dangerous. I cannot tell you how many people have been hurt by these. People get around with their amps running. They get back there fiddling around, unscrewing the coax, changing the slugs or the elements in their line section, and they bump into the wire. It comes flopping off. They've got their arm up on top of the amp. The wire brushes up against the amp, and boom, you're either dead or you're in some serious pain because you've just been electrocuted. People get back there and jerk. I've heard of this happening. They get back there and, whatever, muscle spasm, involuntary motion, whatever, and they jerk up against that high voltage wire, and it's enough to knock it out of this connector, and then the high voltage wire is on them, and they're sitting there getting electrocuted. Doesn't have to be over the recommended amount of voltage for something like that to happen. They can still be dangerous even if you're running, 4,000 volts on them. I was told years ago, don't even get back there and unscrew. Don't ever get back there and unscrew your coax with an amp running. Just don't. Doesn't matter who built it. Joe the Grinder's been at my house. I was going to change a slug out in the back of a very large amp one time, and he about slapped the shit out of me because he wanted me to, realize how dangerous it was, even though he built it and he's one of the safest people I know. Extremely cautious with his builds. I mean, he doesn't want to send a death trap home with somebody. But even as cautious as he is, he doesn't feel comfortable messing around the back of his amps or having me do it. He doesn't want to be responsible for somebody getting killed. So he scolded me for it, and I haven't done it since. I want him to put a slug in a line section that's bolted to the back of the amp. Because if the high voltage escapes this connector, all of a sudden you've got a live wire on your hands. The RF deck can become live. A lot of people run ground wires between the RF deck and the high voltage supply to kind of as a preventive measure in case a failure happens. Hopefully it will ground out and not kill you. It will ground through that. It'll find ground somewhere else and not through you. But it can happen. There was a few years ago, it was big thing. I don't exactly know how it happened. I think the guy's RF deck became live. It wasn't getting the ground. The high voltage got on to the amplifier side, and he went to finished turning his amp on, and it electrocuted him. So almost killed the guy. Many people hospitalized because of this stuff, guys. I'm not trying to scare anybody from running tube amps. Most of your bigger operators, once you get to a certain level, you don't have no option but to run a tube amp. If you're a serious competitor in the hobby, it's eventually that's what you're going to end up having to run. 10 kW plus, it's basically a no-brainer. But I won't keep going about this. I just think this is something, like I said, people assume that when they're buying an amp from somebody that these people know what they're doing. And there's folks that do. I'm not saying Joe the Grinder's the only amp builder in the country. He don't even build amps like full time like he used to now. I'm not saying he's the only person that knows how to build a safe amp. But there's a lot of people out there that don't care what they're sending home with you. They're looking for the cheapest way to make money, where they can make the most money. They'll put one of these little Millen connectors on there just because it's easy, convenient, and you've got trouble on your hands. So if you have one of these connectors on your amp, be careful. I've got one amp that has it on there, and I feel comfortable running it. It's well below the voltage limit, but still it's something to be leery of and be cautious of. Check them every now and again. When your amp is powered off and you don't have any, it's not anything's turned on, take a peek and make sure that the wire is not about to fall out of the connector. Just preventive stuff like that can save someone's life or save you a bad trip to the hospital. Trust me, I was going to post the pictures, but I'm not going to do that. I don't know this guy. It's not appropriate for me to do that. The pictures are on Facebook. You may see them. It's pretty gruesome what happened to him. It blew a dang hole in his arm and in his hand, it looks like. It messed him up pretty bad. So my thoughts to that gentleman. I don't know him, but I feel very bad for his situation. And also in the pictures, you guys can see, if you do find the pictures, Millen connector on the back looks like the high voltage wire was pulled out of it, and it looks like it arced up against the case of his amp. And I can only assume that he was probably touching his amp at the time that this happened. So that's it, guys. Not to be doom and gloom, but just it's something, man. Nobody needs to get that hurt or die over a dang CB radio or ham radio hobby. All right, everybody have a good one out there. Lots of videos coming up. Rooster in Tennessee, roostercb.com.